Hello, AniCod here. Now, I don't know what a merry-go-round's got to do with bows and arrows on Rust, but let's just go with it. Now, as the title would suggest, this video is about bows and arrows. So, you can get 4 types of arrow on this game. The standard arrow, which costs 25 wood and 10 stone. You've got the high velocity arrow, which costs 20 wood and 5 frag. You've got the bone arrow in the bottom right, which costs 25 wood and 10 bone. And you've also got the fire arrow, which costs 20 wood, 2 cloth and 10 low grade fuel. Now, there's only 3 types of weapon that you can fire these bows from. First one being a standard bow, which costs 200 wood and 50 cloth. Then we've also got the compound bow, which does the most damage at full draw. That costs 100 wood, 25 frag and 2 feet of rope. Then you've also got the crossbow, which costs 200 wood, 75 frag and 2 foot of rope. And the crossbow's got the longest load time. So we're going to go into all these into detail. I'm going to show you the damage. That's enough talking and messing about. Let's get straight into it. Now, the standard bow, as you go into craft, you can look at the weapon information and you can clearly see that the damage is 50. You've also got really good accuracy and recoil. The fire rate, I'll explain why that's important in a minute. And really low range, as you can imagine. However, don't get caught out with this, because you can still hit headshots from miles away if you know how to use these right. This is what it looks like when it's in your hand. If you're wondering how to do that, just press N, and then we can move on to the compound bow. Now, this one damage is 100, and this is when you stood completely still and you're on full draw. Its accuracy is amazing. You've got very little recoil. The fire rate is 60, and the range is obviously a lot further with it being a compound bow. Again, this is what it looks like in your hand. Pretty smart looking bow. And let's move on to the final one. Now, the crossbow does slightly less damage because you can't charge it. However, it's got really good accuracy and really good recoil. The fire rate is much lower at 17, but the range is sort of in the middle at 34. Again, there's a lot of people that use crossbows. You can actually put sights on them, so it makes quite a decent weapon for beginners, and if you just like using sights on your weapons to make it a little bit easier for you. This is what it looks like, pretty much standard bow. Remember, for these 3 weapons you can get different skins. Now, the standard arrow with this bow does 50 damage, and you're looking at about 50 damage per second as well. It takes about a second to load another. There is a 1.5 damage multiplier for headshots, so you will do 75 damage per shot if you get a nice cheeky headshot in there. The velocity is 50, so pretty decent. You do get a fair range before it starts to drop off, and I dare say this is probably the most popular combination in the first day of wipe. The rest of the arrows, you can tell what you're using by the tip. So high velocity, you can clearly see it's just the same as a standard arrow. However, you've got a broadhead on the tip. Weirdly enough, it does slightly less damage. So you're looking 40 damage. And again, because it takes 1 second to load, you're looking at 40 DPS as well. Again, a 1.5 times headshot. So you're looking at 60 damage altogether for a headshot. The velocity on this arrow is much greater at 80. And you can see that as soon as you release the bow, the arrow hits almost instantly. One word of warning going between standard arrows and high velocity is try and stick to one or the other, because as soon as you get muscle memory when using these arrows, if you keep flicking to and from, it probably will catch you out. Personally, I like to stick with the standard arrows just because they're more common, and as I mentioned before, once you get that muscle memory, you can get straight into a firefight and you shouldn't even have to think where you're aiming too much. You can tell a bone arrow by having a big dirty tip, as you can see here. It is a perfect arrow for beginners because the broader head makes it much easier to hit people. It is quite low damaging, so 40. Again, because of the bow you're using, it's 40 DPS and a 1.5 times multiplier, which means a headshot will do 60 damage to your target. There is quite a lot of drop off with these arrows. You do only get 45 velocity out of them, so you do have to aim slightly higher than normal. I would recommend you wean yourself off of these arrows once you get used to how it works and move to the standard wooden arrow. That's my personal opinion anyway. Finally, the fire arrow, probably one of the most underrated arrows that can be used for raiding, especially shooting out turrets at long range. Really good bits of kit. Now, from the bow, it does 40 damage, but you can add 20 onto that for the fire as well, which makes the DPS 60 for this weapon. Again, you've got a 1.5 times multiplier for headshots, and the velocity is quite slow at 40, but you're not expecting a super speed arrow with a fireball on the end of it. It could be quite overpowered. You can also use the arrows for area denial. For example, if you've got one way out of your base, you can fire it to block the base doorway, for example, with lots of fire so no one can run in and out. Remember, when you run into fire on this game, your character slows down, making you more vulnerable. Now the compound bow really is an amazing piece of kit. You do need a level 1 workbench to craft it, but it's very, very worth it. It looks pretty cool. The tips of the arrows won't get in your way because the sight is actually set above. This means the line of sight is completely clear no matter what you use. Now to charge the bow, all you have to do is make sure you're kneeling or standing completely still and keep your finger on aim, and it will automatically charge a little bar. If you move left and right or jump up and down, the bar will start from scratch and you have to stand still another couple of seconds to get it up to full charge again. You can fire this bow with no charge whatsoever and you will average about 40 damage depending what arrows you use. With a standard wooden arrow, the damage is actually 50 with no charge whatsoever, and fully charged it goes up to 100 damage, which is just incredible. There is also a 1.5 headshot multiplier, and you don't need me to tell you, a wooden arrow at full charge hitting someone in the head is instant down. The velocity on this is 50 without charge, and it will always double on a full charge. So for this particular arrow you're looking at 100 velocity, which is just incredibly fast. The high velocity arrow does 40 to 80 damage and will go from 20 to 40 DPS. Again, a 1.5 times headshot, and the velocity on this is just incredible. So with no charge whatsoever, you're already doing 80 velocity. On a full charge, you're going to be doing 160 velocity. Remember, it doubles every time. Just watch how fast the arrow hits the target when using a high velocity arrow at full charge. Now the bone arrow again does between 40 and 80 damage, 20 to 40 DPS with a 1.5 times headshot, and the velocity on this is manageable at full draw, so it does 45 with no draw whatsoever and obviously doubles to 90, which makes it a little bit faster than a high velocity with no draw. You noticed how fast the drop off was by using the standard bow? Well, obviously at full charge you get next to no drop at all. The fire arrows for this weapon will do 40 to 80 damage depending on the draw. Remember, you need to add 20 on that as well for the fire effect. Now one thing I'll mention now is there's some armour on the game with negative defence against fire, so this has the potential to cause even more damage. Now the DPS is 25 to 60, again depending on your draw, 1.5 headshot, and the velocity, believe it or not, is slightly slower than the bone arrow. The fire arrow has the slowest velocity out of any other arrow, so you're looking at 40 with no charge on your bow, up to 80, which is the same speed as a bog standard high velocity arrow. Again, it's not something to be sniffed at, and you need to think of the extra applications you can use these fire arrows for, as I mentioned before. Finally, the crossbow. It's effectively a slow loading single shot bow slash gun. It is pretty average, however will do more damage than the standard bow and the compound bow, as long as the compound bow hasn't got a charge. For example, a wooden arrow, as you can see here, does 60 damage, which means it will only take 2 arrows to down someone. However, because it's so slow loading, there is only a 17 damage per second on it. Again, we're all running off 1.5 times headshot multipliers. The velocity is slightly higher as well than the bow and the compound, so long as the compound hasn't been charged. For example, the wooden arrow will do 75 velocity, which is pretty decent. The high velocity arrow in this weapon will do 48 damage, a slightly lower damage per second, which is 13, but the velocity is 120, so that's 40 more than if you were using the standard bow. Again, you can tell what arrows are in the crossbow just by looking at the tip. Bone arrow will do 48 damage, same damage per second as the high velocity, but will only do 68 velocity. Finally, the fire arrow will do 48 damage. Remember, you do need to add the 20 for the fire. A slightly higher DPS, in fact it's the highest DPS from any arrow with a crossbow at 19, and that's purely because of the fire damage. The velocity on this is the slowest by far at only 60, but as long as you're on target, you're going to do some serious damage to your opponent, especially if they're wearing armour. Now a good thing about the crossbow is because it's kind of like a gun, you can add attachments to it, which makes it much easier to aim. For example, you can go from the red dot all the way up to the 16 times. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but you can conduit. You can also add flashlights and lasers onto the bottom of it as well, just to help you out. I'm not a big fan of using any sights on this weapon, to be honest with you, but if you're a beginner, I would probably recommend starting with a red dot, just because it's a nice clean sight. If you don't want to use that, it might be worth going for the holographic, and that's if you want to waste the tech trash. Right, as usual, it's been an ultra fast video. I tried to fit as much information in there as I could without wasting too much time. If you did like the video, feel free to leave a like, and it lets me know I'm doing a good job. If you want to see more of these videos, feel free to subscribe, and if you use the bell notification, then it'll notify you on your phone every time I release a new video. I use all the social media. Have a look in the description down below. You'll be able to keep tabs on everything I'm doing at all times. Thank you for watching, and again, see you in the next video.